On June 23, 2010, the Sonoma Marine Fair in Petaluma, California, had only been open for about 90 minutes when a children's ride became the scene of a horrific accident. The ride was called the Wacky Worm, a small green caterpillar-style roller coaster that moved slowly around a short figure-8 track. It was not a massive thrill ride. It was meant for children, which made what happened even more shocking. Several kids were already on board as the coaster made its usual loop. Nearby, a carnival worker in his 20s had returned from a break and approached the ride area. He was not the operator of that ride, and according to reports, he had no clear reason to be inside that section. But he opened a safety gate and stepped onto the active track. At that moment, the coaster was already moving, and that's where one ordinary step became catastrophic. The worker had his back turned and appeared unaware that the train was coming toward him. The ride struck him directly, knocking him down onto the track as the children remained inside the cars. For a brief moment, riders and staff were still processing what had happened. Then the coaster continued forward and passed over him before finally coming to a stop. Emergency responders rushed in almost immediately. The worker had suffered a devastating below-the-knee injury, and witnesses helped preserve the severed limb while paramedics prepared him for transport. Some of the children on the ride had seen what happened, while others were quickly told to look away. Investigators later found that the ride itself had not malfunctioned. There had been no operator error and no mechanical failure. The worker had entered a restricted area while the ride was active, a place he was never supposed to be. And that was what made the footage so disturbing. It was not a massive structural collapse, a broken restraint, or a runaway coaster. It was one wrong step into the path of a ride that was doing exactly what it was designed to do. But things only get darker from here. Samantha Serio was not chasing viral attention or global fame. Within collegiate gymnastics, she was known for something quieter: consistency, discipline, and control. As a senior at Auburn University, she had spent years repeating the same movements until they became instinct. Every pass, every landing, every correction had been trained over and over again. And on April 5, 2019, at the NCAA Regional in Baton Rouge, she stepped onto the floor for what looked like another routine competition moment. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The energy in the arena was high, her teammates were watching, and Samantha began her floor routine with the same focus she had carried through her entire career. She was not attempting something reckless for attention. She was performing a pass she had trained for, trusting the timing and muscle memory that had carried her through years of gymnastics. Then came the landing. In the air, the movement still looked controlled, but gymnastics leaves almost no room for being slightly off. When Samantha came down, her legs landed in a way her body could not absorb. In a fraction of a second, the routine was over. The crowd's energy disappeared almost instantly, replaced by a stunned silence as everyone realized this was not a normal fall. Medical staff rushed onto the floor while her teammates looked on in shock. Samantha had suffered 2 dislocated knees and multiple torn ligaments in both legs. She was taken out of the arena on a stretcher, and the injury ended her gymnastics career that same night. What made the moment so difficult to watch was not just the injury itself. It was how ordinary the setup had been. There was no obvious warning, no dramatic mistake before it happened, and no sense that the next second would change everything. Samantha survived, recovered, and later moved forward with her life beyond gymnastics. But she never returned to competition. Her story stayed with people because it showed the brutal side of a sport built on perfection. A movement can be practiced hundreds of times. A landing can feel routine. But in gymnastics, one fraction of a second can be enough to end everything an athlete has spent years building. And that takes us to this. Next incident that happened on October 26, 2024, at a traveling fair in La Aurora, in Ecuador's Dal Canton. It should have been a normal night of music, lights, and festival crowds. The ride was a swinging pendulum attraction, lifting gondola cars back and forth through the air as riders experienced the usual mix of height, speed, and controlled fear. At first, everything appeared normal. The gondolas swung through their cycle, rising higher with each pass while people watched from the platform below. But as the ride continued, something about the motion seemed to change. It no longer looked smooth. The gondola began swinging in a way that felt unstable, and then a loud horn cut through the noise of the fair. Moments later, the ride struck part of the platform. One of the mechanical arms holding the gondolas gave way, and the structure suddenly collapsed mid-motion. 2 gondola cars detached while passengers were still strapped inside. One crashed down onto the platform, while the other was thrown to the side before slamming into the ground. Onlookers scattered in panic, while others ran toward the wreckage, not yet knowing what they were about to find.
Yo que acababa de entrar dije con mis hijos a esta huevada, pues nunca le tengo tanta fe y se cayó esta verga.
At least by this point, the ride had stopped, but the damage was already done. The gondolas were crushed and broken, with passengers still trapped in their seats. Witnesses described a chaotic scene around the wreckage as people tried to understand who was injured and how badly. Emergency responders arrived and began treating the victims before rushing them to nearby hospitals. In total, 10 people were injured, 6 of them critically. Several suffered fractures and head trauma. Investigators later said a mechanical arm had come loose, causing the gondola cars to detach during the ride. And in just a few seconds, a fairground attraction built to create excitement became something far more serious. For the people strapped inside, there was no warning and no way to react. Only the sudden realization that the ride was no longer holding them. And now, we move to another moment where someone climbed in expecting fun, and instead found themselves trapped in real danger. On a cold January night in 2025, Philadelphia was overflowing with celebration. The Eagles had just won the NFC Championship, and thousands of fans poured into the streets. Fireworks lit the sky, people climbed signs and poles, and the city pulsed with the kind of chaotic energy that can make danger feel almost invisible. In the middle of that crowd was 18-year-old Tyler Sabapathy, a freshman at Temple University. He had moved from Toronto to Philadelphia to study exercise and sport science, and he was also a member of Temple's club gymnastics team. Tyler was not just athletic, he was a decorated gymnast with more than 120 medals, someone who had spent years training balance, strength, and control. That background may have made the moment feel less dangerous than it really was. As the crowd celebrated near Center City, Tyler climbed a light pole while people around him cheered and recorded. To most people, it was reckless. But for someone with his athletic background, the movement may have felt familiar. Just another physical challenge in the middle of an adrenaline-filled night. Then his grip slipped. Tyler fell from the pole and struck the concrete below, suffering a critical head injury. The celebration around him turned instantly into panic as people realized how badly he had been hurt. He was rushed to Jefferson Hospital, where doctors placed him in critical condition. For 2 days, his family and the Temple community waited for news. But on January 28, 2025, Tyler Sababathy died from his injuries. He was only 18. His death left behind a painful reminder of how quickly celebration can turn into tragedy. Tyler had spent much of his life learning how to control his body in the air, but that night was not a gym, a mat, or a competition floor. It was a crowded street, a metal pole, and unforgiving concrete below. And in one split second, the skills that had made him feel fearless were not enough to save him. But the next story is disturbing for a completely different reason. Tilikum was captured near Iceland in 1983 when he was still a young orca, and from that moment on, his entire life changed. Instead of growing up in the open ocean, moving with a pod across vast distances, he was taken into captivity and eventually sent to Sealand of the Pacific in Canada. To audiences, the shows looked controlled, trainers giving signals, orcas responding on cue, music playing, and crowds watching an animal that seemed trained to entertain. But behind that performance was a much darker reality. Tilikum was a massive male orca living in an environment far smaller than anything his species was built for, and over time, former trainers and animal experts would argue that captivity itself could create stress, frustration, and unpredictable behavior. On February 20th, 1991, those concerns became impossible to ignore. Kelty Byrne, a 20-year-old trainer and competitive swimmer, was working at Sealand when she slipped into the whale pool. At first, it looked like an accident that staff might still be able to fix. But within moments, the orcas began pulling her through the water. Kelty tried to stay above the surface, and other employees desperately attempted to reach her, but the whales would not let her go. The people watching were helpless, because they were not dealing with one animal making a quick movement. They were watching three powerful orcas turn the pool into a place no human could control. By the time Kelty was recovered, she had died. The incident was officially ruled an accident, but it changed everything for Sealand. The park never truly recovered from what happened and eventually closed, selling its orcas to SeaWorld. Tilikum was moved to SeaWorld Orlando, where he became one of the most recognizable orcas in the park. But the history attached to him did not disappear. On July 6, 1999, staff at SeaWorld Orlando made another disturbing discovery. A 27-year-old man named Daniel Dukes had hidden inside the park after closing and somehow entered Tilikum's pool during the night. The next morning, his body was found inside the enclosure. SeaWorld described him as a trespasser, and his death was also ruled accidental. But the fact that it happened in Tilikum's pool added another layer to the orca's already troubling history. For years after that, Tilikum continued performing. To most visitors, he was still part of the show, a massive animal moving through rehearsed routines in front of cheering crowds. But on February 24, 2010, everything changed again. After a performance at SeaWorld Orlando, veteran trainer Dawn Bronshaw was working with Tilikum near the edge of the pool during a post-show interaction. She knew him well. She had worked with him many times before. But in one sudden moment, Tilikum grabbed her and pulled her into the water. The situation immediately turned into a crisis. Other employees tried to distract him with food, commands, and equipment, but Tilikum would not release her. The people around the pool could only watch as a routine interaction became something far beyond their control. By the time Dawn was recovered, it was too late. Her death sent shockwaves far beyond SeaWorld and forced the company to change the way trainers worked with orcas. After the incident, SeaWorld stopped trainers from performing in the water with orcas, and Tilikum became the center of a much larger debate about captivity, animal welfare, and whether animals this powerful should ever have been used for entertainment in the first place. That debate only grew after the documentary Blackfish, which turned Tilikum's life into one of the most controversial stories in modern marine park history. Tilikum died in 2017 from a bacterial lung infection, but his story never really ended, because what made it so disturbing was not just that one animal was connected to 3 deaths. It was the larger question behind all of them. Was Tilikum simply dangerous by nature, or had decades in captivity helped create the very danger people later feared? Either way, his life became a haunting reminder that an animal built for the open ocean can never truly be understood inside a pool built for crowds. But Tilikum's story was not the only time a place meant for entertainment became the scene of something horrifying. Nora Whitaker had already stepped away from gymnastics once, leaving behind the routines, the pressure, and the constant demand for control. But some parts of the sport never fully left her. The rhythm, the timing, the feeling of trusting your body in the air, all of it stayed with her. And eventually, that pull brought her back, not to a packed arena or a competition floor, but to a quiet gym where she trained alone. At first, it seemed harmless. She was returning to movements she had once known well, trying to reconnect with a part of herself she had spent years mastering. But gymnastics is unforgiving, especially when no one is nearby to spot you, correct you, or stop the session when something starts to feel off. One small mistake can change everything before there is any time to react. That day, she moved toward the uneven bars and prepared for a sequence that required perfect timing. For a moment, everything looked controlled. Her grip was set, her body moved into rhythm, and the routine seemed familiar enough to trust. But as she transitioned through the movement, something went wrong. She lost control in the air, and before she could correct herself, her body dropped toward the mat beneath her. The impact was devastating. She landed directly onto her neck, the kind of fall every gymnast fears, because there is almost no way to protect yourself once your body is already rotating downward. For a moment, the gym fell into a terrifying stillness. What made the footage so disturbing was how quickly it went from routine to irreversible. 1 second, she was performing a movement she had likely done countless times before. The next, she was on the ground after a fall that left no room for recovery. Nora did not survive, and her story became a chilling reminder of how dangerous gymnastics can be, even outside competition. Because in a sport built around control, the most terrifying moment is the one where control disappears completely. But the danger doesn't stop here. Theme parks are built to feel controlled. Every restraint, every launch, and every second of a ride was supposed to be calculated before the train ever left the station. That was why people trusted them. But at Universal's Epic Universe in Orlando, that sense of control disappeared on one of the park's most anticipated rides. Stardust Racers was a high-speed, dual-launch coaster designed to make riders feel like two comets racing through space, reaching speeds of up to 62 miles per hour as the trains twisted, crossed, and accelerated through the track. And on September 17, 2025, 32-year-old Kevin Rodriguez Zavala boarded the ride with his girlfriend, expecting the same controlled thrill as everyone else. From the outside, everything seemed routine. The restraints were checked, the seats were locked, and the train moved forward. But according to later reports, securing Kevin's lap bar had taken several attempts, and his girlfriend felt something was not right, even before the ride truly began. Kevin used a wheelchair and had limited lower body support, which meant that once the coaster started moving, he could not brace himself the way other riders could. As the train climbed and prepared for its first major drop, the danger was already building inside his seat. This was where the ride turned from thrilling to terrifying. As the coaster dropped and accelerated, Kevin's body was forced forward with a violence his girlfriend could not control. She tried to hold on to him, but the forces of the ride were stronger than anything she could do from the seat beside him.
I saw him was too low. He doesn't have any support on his leg. They pushed it about 3 times, maybe 4.
Who pushed the ride worker?
Yeah. I saw him on the first drop. I saw him hit his head. I tried to hold him. I couldn't hold him. Another one, he hit his head. He just went up and hit.
So the seat was loose?
It looked like it was tight, but it wasn't. Like I said, he doesn't have support on his leg, so he can't just hold support so he can just stay in place. That's all I can remember. I lost my glasses halfway up the ride. All I know, he kept hitting his head. I tried to hold him so he doesn't hit his head anymore, but he was...
She saw him lurch forward and strike his head, and from that moment, the situation was no longer just uncomfortable. It was becoming life-threatening while the ride continued moving through the track. By the time the train returned to the station, Kevin was unresponsive. Staff and emergency responders rushed to him. CPR was started, and witnesses described a chaotic scene around the platform.
I don't know if you caught it, supervisors or inbound.
They're asking to update the cabin before. We're going to code. He can cancel. You can cancel on when this goes. 2 minutes. I
got the arm, Jaden.
Perfect. I got a 2-minute timer going.
Cool. Got a timer going.
All good?
He was taken to the hospital, but he did not survive. His death was later ruled accidental, caused by multiple blunt force injuries. What made the case so difficult to process was that investigators did not find a simple broken part to blame. Universal said the ride systems had functioned as intended, and state findings aligned with the conclusion that the equipment had operated properly. But that only made the story more unsettling, because nothing had to snap, fall, or explode for the ride to become fatal. Somewhere between the restraint, the forces, and Kevin's physical condition, a system built for controlled fear became something far more real. But the next incident was different, and just as terrifying. Just hours before the opening ceremony of the 2010 Winter Olympics, a 21-year-old Georgian athlete was taking what should have been one final training run. Nodar Kumaritashvili had spent years chasing speed in luge, one of the fastest and most unforgiving sports on ice. But at the Whistler Sliding Center in Canada, he was facing a track many athletes already considered dangerously fast. On February 12, 2010, Nodar pushed off from the men's start and began descending the course. At first, it looked like another training run, but as he approached the final section of the track, the speed became overwhelming. He entered the late curves at extremely high velocity, and once the sled began to climb too high on the wall, the run started slipping out of control. He tried to correct it, but the movement only became more violent. The sled snapped across the ice, and in a split second, Nodar was thrown out of it. He flew over the sidewall of the track and struck an exposed steel support pole at around 143.6 kilometers per hour. The impact was catastrophic.
Have you ever seen an accident like that before?
No, I've never seen anyone fly off the track. We see sleds flying out of the track every once in a while, but nothing like that.
Officials and medical staff rushed to him immediately, but the force of the crash had left him motionless beside the track. CPR was performed at the scene as responders tried desperately to bring him back.
Compete on his honor.
He was airlifted to a nearby hospital, but his injuries were too severe. Later that same day, Nodar Kumaritashvili was pronounced dead. The tragedy stunned the Olympic community before the Games had even begun. During the opening ceremony, the Georgian team entered wearing black armbands, walking under the weight of a loss no athlete, coach, or spectator was prepared for. After the crash, officials modified the track and moved the men's luge start lower to reduce speeds. But the damage had already been done. Nodar had arrived in Whistler to compete on the world's biggest stage, and within seconds, one final practice run became the moment that overshadowed the entire opening day of the Olympics. Now the next story shows that the scariest failures are often the ones nobody sees coming. Yulong Shuyun Water. Amusement park in Longjing, China, was known for its wave pool, an attraction designed to imitate the ocean in a controlled setting. Wave pools are meant to feel exciting without becoming dangerous. The machinery sends water forward in timed bursts, creating waves that lift swimmers and inflatables just enough to feel thrilling. But on July 29, 2019, that controlled system failed in front of a crowded pool. Guests were floating on inflatables, standing in shallow water, and enjoying what looked like a normal day at the park. Then the waves suddenly became far larger than they were supposed to be. What started as a normal swell turned into a powerful wall of water that rushed through the pool with enough force to knock people over, throw them from their floats, and slam them into one another. Within seconds, the wave pool no longer looked like a controlled attraction. It looked like a miniature tsunami. People screamed as inflatables collided. Swimmers were pushed toward the shallow edges, and families tried to get out of the water before another wave hit. By the time the machine stopped and the pool was cleared, 44 people had been injured. 5 were hospitalized, with reported injuries including fractured ribs and other trauma. Investigators later said a power cut had damaged the electronic system controlling the wave machine. Instead of producing manageable waves, the system created one far stronger than expected. No one died, but the footage showed how quickly a water attraction could turn against the people inside it. The most frightening part was that the guests had no reason to be on guard. They were not in the open ocean. They were in a pool, surrounded by other tourists, trusting the machinery to keep the danger artificial. And now, we move to a case where the line between entertainment and disaster disappeared almost instantly. In January 2020, Noelia Medina and her partner, Hernan Cobos, went to Aquapolis in Mar del Plata, Argentina, expecting nothing more than a normal summer afternoon at a water park. They had gone there with friends, spent time near the pools, and eventually decided to try one of the larger slides near the back of the park. It was the kind of attraction that was supposed to feel fast but safe, a spiral water slide where riders descended on an inflatable ring, trusting that the structure beneath them would hold the entire way down. At first, everything seemed routine. They collected the inflatable, climbed up, sat together, and were pushed forward into the slide. But as they neared the lower section, the ring drifted toward the side. That kind of shift should have meant nothing more than a rougher turn. Instead, it brought them into the exact point where the slide opened apart. The structure gave way while they were still moving, and in an instant, the ride became a violent accident. Hernan's leg was cut deeply by the broken section of the slide, while Noelia was thrown out, striking her head and body as she fell. Employees helped them to the park's first aid area, but according to the couple, the ambulance took around 40 minutes to arrive. Noelia needed 5 stitches to her head and medication for bruising and swelling. Hernan's injury was far worse, requiring treatment for a deep wound in his leg that reportedly measured around 25 centimeters. What made the incident even more frustrating for them was what happened afterward. They said the park helped at first, but later failed to properly check on them or take responsibility for the recovery they were facing. And that is what makes the accident so disturbing. This was not a thrill ride where danger was obvious. It was a water slide, something people trust without thinking. But once the structure beneath them opened, they had no way to slow down, no way to stop, and no chance to avoid the impact. That's all for today, folks. If you'd like to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.